And so how do we link violence against women from a global state of violence with the fact that children commit suicide in refugee camp, with the fact that police and military's massive recourse to rape in armed conflict everywhere? And that is not just the rape of women, but also the rape of men. With the exile of millions of people because of the multiplication of war zones, of economic and climate conditions that have rendered zones of living uninhabitable. With the relentless increase of precarity, can we imagine addressing only part of this violence without considering this larger state of permanent war? Can we continue not to see that all these forms of violence mutually reinforce one another, and that those more directly affect women are the result of an extremely violent society? The recent mobilization against gender-based and sexual violence offer a theoretical and practical opportunity today that of making this violence the very terrain on which to challenge capitalism. My analysis, though, does not offer solution, though, for the eradication of violence, but aim to contribute to the reflection on violence as a structural element of patriarchy and capitalism, rather than specifically male. I want us to imagine a post-violence society, not a society without conflict and contradiction, but a society that does not naturalize violence, that does not celebrate it, that does not make it the central theme of its narrative of power. In neoliberalism, the efficient body is that of the white man in full possession of physical strength, normalized as masculine. He gets up early, he goes jogging, he eats organic food, and without counting his hour, works, to achieve economic success. What we see in the survey, they come home at like 1 a.m., 2 a.m. because they can work, lots. That's also the fact of success, that the idea of like being able to work from Monday to Sunday. What this representation of the valid body hides is that its efficiency is made possible by the work of racialized body. As I said, the woman who cleans the gym, the office, the restaurant he fixes his appointment in, the hotel where he hangs with his friends, lovers, or sex workers, the trainer, the plane he takes, the classroom he teaches in, the house he goes home to his family. All these women, whose body are exhausted so that his can excel. Racialized men are his world security guard, his chauffeur. The people of the global south provide him and his family with the object of their comfort. The valid body is protected by a whole host of police measures which are invisible too, for they are naturalized, guaranteeing his protection, gated communities, surveillance camera, police presence, and so forth. As for the white bourgeois woman, she more often than not buys her comfort thanks to the exploitation of women and girls in the global south, and really girls. The fast fashion clothes that enables her to keep up with the latest trend, her children nanny, the cleaning woman who clean the world she moves in, the exploited nurses, the sex workers who cater to her husband or companion. Shut away in their enclave, the valid body exclude body perceived as threatening who only enter the world under authorization. And I want just to add on this question of geopolitics of cleanliness and dirtiness, and the fact that the woman would clean. Also, other form of state violence, to operate, to draw that line between cleanness and uncleanliness. And we can think, of course, in Brazil, where the garbage is picked up or not picked up, and I'm sure in Lebanon you have a lot to say about that. But we can also think about Palestine, like how Israel sent, we're dumping polluted garbage on Gaza. So the Gaza beach was dirty and polluted, and this could be constructed with a very clean beach of Tel Aviv. So you had a clean Mediterranean, for fun and sun, and you had a dirty Mediterranean, inhabited by brown and black body. So black, brown Mediterranean versus, white, clean Mediterranean. So that's it's really looking for me as how the world is made uninhabitable. Is not just, it's really absolutely fabricated. It's a state, it's a choice, it's political choice, And it's very important also in the discourse, even for tourism, of course, it's for economic, a lot of things, where you're going to have the cafe, when you're going to, this is very fun to be, like on the beach and have, and have a cafe. All this construction of where it is a safe place, the nice place, the place to enjoy, the place, that effectively is connected to the image that goes with the sea and the fun, and the place we are dangerous, dirty, and the constant fabrication of image of that, the constant fabrication of, pile of dump on the one hand with children, looking through them, and on the other side, children playing in parks, green parks, with like butterfly around. So this is constant construction, and it's every day in newspaper, in magazine, that construction of clean, dirty, and the word that in which you can breathe, and the word don't go because it will be irrespirable, unbreathable. And that is a constant. And we saw it even, as I say, even more with COVID-19, right? So it's a word where the zone of non-being proliferate, the zone, fabricating as unclean. And it was Frank Fanon who called that, the zone of non-being. He wrote in a black skin, white mask, and for him it was hell, he said, like that was the zone of non-being. It is the zone where the colonizer locked the colonizing. It's a dismining, space that separates the zone of being from the zone of non-being. And this does not belong, to the past. It's with us now, being multiplied around the world. Is no longer in the colony, at the time. It's in the camp, the word of camp. It's multiplying. It's everywhere. It's in Europe. It's in the Americas. It's in Africa, in the Middle East. We saw it last year on 21 at the Belarus-Poland border, when there were thousands of Syrian refugees, Afghan refugees, caught between the Belarus police and the Poland police in freezing temperature and being, dosed with very cold water, wandering in the forest in absolutely sub-freezing temperature, dying of cold in the forest. And this was called by the government of Poland the hybrid war. So refugees, the bodies of refugees were transformed into, like a threat of an hybrid war. So it was no longer a human being. It was in the zone of non-being, absolutely built. And these camps are proliferating. We can talk of course, in Ukraine, in Syria, in Palestine, in France, on the US-Mexico border, and so on. And these people lose all their rights. We are no longer even in the stateless situation, which is a situation in which, nobody. And I've been thinking, and I have not fully been able to analyze that. I'm thinking also about the camp where the women who were the wives of the ISIS soldier are. And nobody wants them. They are absolutely in a no-no zone. Their country don't want them back. The children are absolutely in limbo. And this is absolutely, it's not really like the refugee camp. It's a new form of camp. There are only women and children. And these women, nobody wants them. So what is being created there, and it's practically out of really, the view. On top of it, it's ISIS, so, let's not talk about it. So what is being created in that zone of non-being? Sorry. So for me, it was, all this, how this is being constructed, how, this geography is constructed of the world that is uninhabitable and the world that is inhabitable. And that the fact that those who want to flee the uninhabitable world cannot arrive in the, they are stopped. And of course, even they die in the Mediterranean or the Channel or, everywhere with a die. So, if we subscribe to the society that, to the idea that society are inevitably shaped by violence, it becomes then totally illusory to imagine a post-war society. It is not so much that systemic violence is new, as I say, the longest story that we know about it, but hyperglobalization and the exacerbation of the extractive logic have had an extremely negative impact on the life expectancy. Although people die less at birth every day today on the planet and live longer in the global south, they breathe more polluted air, drink more polluted water, and are more often victim to epidemic, pandemic, debt, the collapse of health and education services. So the question of progress, to go back to the quote of Freud, is like, there is progress on the one hand because less people die at birth, more children can survive their birth, but in fact, they are condemned to premature death. There is a progress, the more progress that were obtained also through struggle, a lot of them through struggle, are in fact absolutely constantly slowed down by new form of barbarism, if we want to go back to Freud quote. So brute, cruel violence is a form of government, a regime of existence. In this necro-empowerment, the injunction to hyper-consumerism produces an extreme brutality. Staying alive is measured by the capacity to instill death on others. Gore capitalism weaponized masculinity to serve its necro-political project. Violence gives meaning to an existence program for premature death. It allows people to exist, even for a short moment, mostly men. It allows men to exist. Having access to what has become the proof of existence. Here, women, trans people, queer people, male and female sex workers are simply bodies to rape, traffic, torture, and kill. All these killable bodies are feminized in the sense that they are put at the disposal of domination. Babies, children, teenagers, adult, elderly, no age group, sex, or gender escape this economy. Murder is now conceived as a transaction, extreme violence as a legitimate tool, torture as an ultra-profitable exercise and display of power. The psychic life of neoliberalism is based on the notion that success is strictly one's own making, that egotism is the motor of excellence and wealth. Ayn Rand, the famous, I will not call her a philosopher, but the famous writer, absolutely admired by all, neoliberal American, largely read over there, provided the philosophy to this ideology, Any vulnerability or sign of weakness is to be eradicated as an obstacle on the path of talented and motivated people, exclusive white men in our philosophy. This ideology encouraged an entirely individual, patriarchal form of responsibility and bolstered conservative nationalism that is also patriarchal. The weak, thereby, become part of the new civilizing mission, the target of a paternalistic philanthropy determined to prevent any emergence of a new conception of inhabiting the world, of being human in the world. The vulnerable are relegated to contemporary zone of non-being, that vast, extraordinary, sterile, and arid region, an utterly naked declivity where an authentic upheaval can be born, final wrote. This is where the use of violence prevails, in which politics coincide with murder and extinction become the norm. While neoliberalism accuses individuals of their own failure, the new form of neo-fascism looks for scapegoat, but the two-edged ideology looks in denying the role of the state and capitalism institutional violence. The analysis of the practice of dehumanization and vulnerabilization demonstrates that we inevitably need to think and act along several temporalities. Repairing past politics of dehumanization, including the very recent past, and their contemporary and emerging form whose impact we can already measure. So, form of entangled temporality, of working with the past, like repairing the past is not yet repaired, this accumulation of damage and prejudice, repairing the present as we see it being, as we speak today, as we sit in this room today, being destroyed, and the future that is already futureless if this continues this way. So how do we work through this temporal and how we rethink progress in the positive sense by thinking of this different temporality, because European progress was always linear. We always go, towards the kingdom to come. This means discovering and collectively experimenting people practice of imagination and devulnerabilization. We do not have an elsewhere completely protected for systemic violence, but we do have a map of fault line and interstices, poorly guarded, opaque spaces in which to deploy practices that are not founded on calculation and market value. This is to say that we need to resist an entire economic existence in which the pillaging and plundering is the incline in many more ways than one. It's an unprecedented corporal destruction, the trafficking and commercialization of what anybody can offer, pushed to the extreme limit. But we also must recognize the seductive power of such rhetoric, even for individual and group victims to this ideology. Being excluded from power does not necessarily ward off its spell. If there are lessons to be learned from the systemic violence that preceded the policy of lockdown decreed in early 2020 around the world, and from the global deterioration of racial, gender, sex, age, and class inequality and injustices, it is that we are living in an era in which it is impossible to escape the unleashing of incredible violence produced by greed, cupidity, and power, unless we organize alongside those who have nothing to lose. Let's not be surprised then by the alliance between progress, when the latter is strictly technological or being advanced, to prove superiority of class or race, and barbarism. Let's not be surprised by this alliance. Let's learn to live with the idea of the irreparable without falling, with into doom and despair. Let's learn to live with loss and then still be, dreaming to have joy. Thank you.
Thank you, Françoise. That was time, and there's a lot there. It's maybe I can make a comment and then open to questions. Maybe people can just, take a minute to think about a question or so on, and then we will take a round of questions. But so I think this idea that you're proposing of this irreparability is quite, it's quite unique in a sense in terms of, usually when people talk about capitalism in terms of the models of extraction, there's generally kind of what comes out of that is this idea that somehow a repair is possible, right? A restitution is possible that would somehow be an answer or be a way towards an answer. And this notion of irreparability that you propose is really, I think, very valuable. As more of a comment than, but just to kind of maybe, to kind of contextualize it in terms of the usual model of dealing with extraction, models of extraction or accumulation based on, the same extraction from the land is the same as the extraction of living labor from the bodies. It's the same as this kind of equalization of all these forms of violence. And you're saying obviously that there are multi-layers of violence, that there's systemic violence, there's these moments of violence, there's structural violence, right? And there are multiple sites on which violence is played out. And we can also not ignore the body, the psyche, right? These places of, again, what you described, this state of fatigue, right? Or, we're in a country where people tried for quite some time to try to bring about a change, right? In a place with, there was a lot of violence exercised on the population. The people are tired. When people say, how do people live in these conditions? You think, you have no water, no electricity, you can't walk in the streets, you can't get your medicine, everything, all the conditions of existence are not there, right? And people are just frantically running around to make them possible. Not everybody equally, obviously. So the question here is, this idea of fatigue or exhaustion. I think it's a very valuable point because we spend so much time thinking about the way that neoliberalism or capitalism produces desires, right? And kind of, how do you say, cannibalizes forms of enjoyment, this hyper-consumer life, this, I don't know, everybody wanting to become a brand, right? This thing, right? The influencers, the creatives, this whole thing, this model, right? And I think it's kind of very, it's sobering to also think that it's not just a production of desires, but it's also this kind of, this tiring out, this, this kind of state of fatigue. And how does one deal with battle fatigue, right? And I really think these concepts you propose are absolutely central for us to consider. These are comments, not really questions, honestly. I mean, obviously I'm a fan, but.
I will just say something. I noticed, with the reading, testimony for refugee or talking with them, how they tell you when the day they arrive in a place where they feel safe and they can take a hot shower and sleep in a real bed, does not mean like a, whatever, but with clean sheet, it totally transforms their sleep. It's not the same, it's not that they have not slept before, but they don't sleep the same way. So there is for me the right to rest as a, as a right that we should fight for against effectively that fatigue. There is something about sleeping, having a good sleep. We know that when we don't sleep well, we are more tired and more irritable and more also then fragile. So that what I mean by exhaustion is like really getting into like deeply, and also fighting against the discourse of resilience.
Yes.
Like, the human being are resilient and, people.
No, but this is, the Lebanese joke. We're all live this because we're resilient. We can handle it, right? I mean, this is obviously not what you're saying. No, thanks for,
yeah. No, I'm talking about the resilience used by NGOs or state, but, like in a way, celebrating the resilience of indigenous people or whatever they have survived through absolutely terrible things. And so in a way, we will continue to, to have terrible things. Because they survive, so they can survive. They survive 5,000 years, so, they could survive. No, we have the right not to live in survival. So that's also, and also what I was thinking when you are talking, there was also, again, to counter the idea of fatigue and stress, that people could still feel constantly. People feel tired. Constantly, people are tired. People tell that workers tell you that when they go home, they just want to sleep. They don't want, they have no time to enjoy, to read or whatever. So it's a constant, really something on the mental and bodily things. And it's and how capitalism will also propose self-help.
Yes.
That compartmental psychology. Go on yourself, do some meditation, do some yoga before going to the factory, and you will, you will go. I mean, all this kind of how they are proliferating, eat well, whatever, even though you don't have the means to do that. But all this constant proposal and this absolutely yoga place everywhere, like if you even have a yoga day in India, like in the place where you have the total fascism of the BJP. So all this, it's like, more, and this construction, so not of desire, no longer, but of place, no, but learn to meditate, learn to breathe, like that, like, so now everywhere, it's in everywhere, in any journal, whatever, on the radio, all this constant advice to get better in a world that in fact is, in the meantime, killing you. There are more diseases going. People are more, there will be more cancer, more, it's already there. So there is a, how can I say, it's not just the pandemic. There is a lot, the racial capitalism is killing us. Slowly or not slowly, depending on our, life, condition of living, but nonetheless, so it's no longer, there are more diseases than it will be. I mean, not only the old disease coming back like cholera in your country or in Haiti, for instance, but even the new form, the fact that, as I say, more children are born with respiratory disease, that can make them not having a full life. When you don't breathe, when your lungs are like small, you don't have the same life like your grandparents. You are more prone to a lot of disease, to, like the little flu, it's worse for you. I mean, so it's a constant production of the very daily little things that for me is, like not the big declaration about capitalism.
Yes.
It's the way in which it's, and it's feed on that life, and the fact that, they are constantly fabricating people that have to do some work, otherwise they die.